Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 21. Country Roads. Martin just had to get out of London. His mum had moved to Norfolk when his folks split up. Now his big sister Jane had moved there too. She said rents were really cheap. Jane said she and her boyfriend had found a cottage near them. He ought to hurry as they tended to go quickly. Martin steered the Jag carefully down the narrow one-track lane. It was only just wide enough for the big saloon. The hedges were so high you couldn't see round the next corner. There were very few places you could pull over to let someone pass. Where you could see across the landscape from the road, it seemed endless. Huge flat cornfields and fields of sugar beet and potatoes. Church spires on the horizon beneath big skies. Here and there gnarled and wizened trees broke up the flatland scenery. A few isolated houses and tiny clusters of cottages were just visible in the distance. The Jag sent up a cloud of dust behind it. The old retired farmer had probably already spotted them. He stood outside the property, waiting for the Londoners. It was semi-detached, formerly a farm labourer's cottage. 2 up, 2 down, with bathroom upstairs and a big garden at the back. Martin saw the farmer and assumed it must be the place, judging by Jane's directions. He pulled over onto the grass verge next to the house. The farmer eyed the car admiringly. Looked like he was onto a good thing. He was more cunning than he looked. Martin introduced himself. "Good morning, you must be Mr. Williams. I'm Martin Dalgleish. We're here to take a look around the cottage." "Good day to you, sir, and to you, ma'am. Go you both inside and see if you like it." The front door was wide open. Martin and Sarah went in and had a look round. There was an electric cooker in the kitchen. It looked like it worked. The living room had an open fireplace. There didn't seem to be any other kind of heating. Up the steep, narrow wooden stairs was one medium-sized, one small bedroom and a bathroom. The wallpaper was peeling off in places all over the house. They'd need to redecorate throughout. It smelt a bit damp and musty. Probably been shut up for quite some time. The garden was a long piece of ground that tapered towards the entrance at the bottom end. The grass and weeds were several feet high in places. With a little imagination, and after a lot of hard work, it might look like a garden again and produce some vegetables. "What do you think, Sarah?" "It's a bit run down, but it's lovely. Maybe we could get it really cheap." They walked back down the garden to where the farmer landlord was standing at the back door, waiting for them. "Looks very nice, Mr. Williams. I think we might be interested." "So how much you prepared to pay for this here cottage?" Martin was expecting him to name a price, but he was wilier than that. Martin thought of their rent in London and halved it. "Well, how about £10 a week?" Sarah kicked him, but it was too late. The farmer probably couldn't believe his luck. "That sound good to me, boy. Would you like to pay me the first month in cash then, before you move in?" Martin counted out £40. He handed it to his new landlord, who counted it again. "Well, that's all right then. I'll give you a receipt and a rent book next time." As the Jag drove away, the grass growing down the middle of the lane tickled its underbelly. The farmer chuckled. "Well, that's a rum, and reckon I done hully well there." Martin sat at a table in the public bar of the 18th century village pub. The local beer was strong. Sarah sat next to him. Jane was there too with her boyfriend. So were some of their friends. There were quite a few locals at the other tables. In the back room there was bar billiards and a jukebox. Martin found it hard to understand the local dialect. Jane's friends were also immigrants from London or other big cities. Lots of people came there to buy cheap derelict cottages. They'd do them up themselves and live the hippie good life. Martin's sister Jane's boyfriend Vic played sax. He was into rockabilly. Her friend Jim played drums. He was into soul and ska. Her friend Stu played bass. He liked punk and power pop. It seemed obvious they should get a band together. The first rehearsals were at Stu's place. They did a mix of punk, ska and rock and roll covers with a couple of Martin's recent originals. Stu's was rather a grand residence, a huge red brick 15th century manor house with a moat. It had an enormous living room with a massive walk-in Tudor fireplace. Stu would drag in half a tree to put on it. Their first booking was the Halloween dance at the village hall. The hall was a wooden-cladded, gable-ended World War I army hut, strangely reminiscent of Martin's previous residence. It had a boarded wooden floor and a tiny wooden platform stage at one end. It was officially large enough to accommodate about 100 people. Martin walked into the bar annex set up at the side of the hall and got one of the first pints from the first keg of local ale. Martin had enjoyed a spliff of homegrown before he'd left the house. He could do with something to nibble. He spotted an innocent-looking bowl next to the crisps and peanuts on the table. Martin recognised its contents as magic mushrooms. Martin grabbed half a dozen. He chewed and swallowed them. The real ale washed down the bitter taste. Should be an interesting night. They decided to call themselves the Village Idiots. Sounded punky and showed they didn't take themselves seriously. The other village idiots had already assembled in the back room. Stu was tuning up. Jim was doing paradiddles on the back of a chair. Vic was pooting into his sax, sufficient to warn any passing ships on a foggy autumn night. Martin got his guitar out of its case and did his best to tune up. The village idiots came out from the back room with their instruments and took up their positions on the wooden stage. It was around a foot high. There was a couple of feet gap at the back wall behind. The place was packed now, and the front rows were already getting vocal. Martin turned round and counted the band in. They kicked into the song almost simultaneously. Jubilant cries from the former hecklers at the front. A wave of movement spread slowly from the front and almost to the back of the audience. More and more people started dancing. A few people were pogoing, and a boy-girl couple were jiving. The place was in uproar, and this was only the first song. Martin felt the mushrooms kick in. It was actually quite a nice, floaty feeling. He had to force himself to say something, not to just stand there and grin between songs. He noticed that his visuals were more interesting than normal, a bit like turning up the colour on the TV. Jim did one of the ska numbers. Vic ripped through some rockabilly standards. Martin just played guitar while he adjusted to his altitude. After about half an hour, he paused to light a cigarette. "So you having a good time?" A drunken roar went up, and a few at the front threw their drinks in the air. They actually didn't have that many songs left on the list, and would probably have to play a couple twice. "Do you want to hear a new one?" The crowd roared and shouted drunkenly again. Okay, you can dance to this one. Martin played the punchy offbeat ska riff that introduced his new song. Jim did the ska rimshot intro fill, and the band followed at a murderous tempo. The song went down a storm. The whole hall was bopping away. Even the landlord was nodding and jigging in time as he poured the pints. Jim was red-faced and sweating, playing as if his life had depended on it. He whacked the bass drum and the cymbals harder than ever. His drum stool moved gradually but imperceptibly backwards until it neared the back edge of the stage. After a particularly violent cymbal crash, Jim toppled backwards with his stool and disappeared from view. Parts of his kit followed and fell on top of him. Vic and Stu were in fits of laughter, trying not to lose it. Martin carried on playing and singing. Jim reappeared heroically and clambered up again. He reassembled his kit as best he could, sat down and began to play again, right on time. Round of applause from the front rows. The song got the biggest cheer of the night. Then they played 2 songs again as an encore. Bob fired up the turntable and the crowd danced on. Martin sat in the back room recovering with a pint and a cigarette. He marvelled at just how successful a simple formula can be. Put a band together from whoever lives nearby. No qualifications needed. Play music to have fun and get people dancing.